I got one last question I want to ask you here, just for fun. Could you tell us a little about that cruise to the South Pacific with your buddy Carl Sagan?
Well, Carl Sagan was invited on the cruise, and the stipend would be not a stipend, but he would go, of course, as their guest, and he would be allowed to bring us as his guests. And I tell you, we had a wonderful time. They gave him, there are 10 suites on the uppermost decks with a bedroom and a living room and a balcony. You sit up high on the ship and the cloud formations on the Pacific. And we would sit there and we'd have a smoke and we'd just have discussions, and the visuals were fantastic. You know, we enjoyed the cruise immensely. He had to give a talk, and I agreed to give a talk on cocaine. I had just published a book on cocaine, but that was really, you know, it was really his attractiveness to them that made it a wonderful cruise. And then when the cruise, the last day of the cruise, we agreed that we should get rid of the marijuana. And I thought that there's a door. It's not called a door in a ship to the cruise quarters. And I thought I'd just throw the bag down there and let the crew, and they'd know what it was and they'd enjoy it. But he was very concerned about that, and so he insisted we drop it overboard with one of those heavy glass ashtrays from the ship. And so it's now we're down at the bottom of the Pacific, and the crew is denied some pleasure, but what the hell?
Well, sir, you are definitely a part of our history and American culture. You're an old guy, but the stories you tell bring some wonderful visuals to my mind. I hope the listeners have enjoyed the show. I just want to say that I think that your contribution to human culture is every bit as important as Masters and Johnson, just to say, for example. And I want to thank you for being here. I hope you continue to have a fruitful career and an enjoyable life. And before you go, can you tell us how best people could reach you, or an email, or maybe mention your website again?
They could reach me on email at Lester_Grinspoon at HMS.Harvard. HMS is for Harvard Medical School. HMS.Harvard.edu. And the website that I think most people would enjoy most is, there are two of them, but I'll just give you the one for time's sake. It's marijuana-uses.com. It was what I was going to write the third book on, but I ran out of steam. I wanted to write a book. I'd written one on, recreation, because that's what Marijuana Reconsidered was all about, was it safe as a recreation. Then I wrote one on the medicine, marijuana, the forbidden medicine. And the third area is this business I call enhancement. And these essays are essays which illustrate how some people find it enhances their lives, other than just as something fun to take and get high with.
Well, and sir, thank you so much.
I look at all those essays. I don't take them all, but I look at them.
Dr. Grinspoon, thank you so much for talking with us today. I hope that we get to meet in person soon in the future. And you have yourself a great day, and thanks for being here. We are out of time, everybody, and thanks for joining us on The Grow Show. I want to thank the guests and producers for making the show possible. Please make sure to check out my website, kylekushman.com, to find out where to follow me on social media and the upcoming events I'll be attending. You can find new episodes of The Grow Show every Wednesday by going to cannabisradio.com or subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I am your host, Kyle Kushman, and as always, please stay lifted.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast or redistribution without proper consent of CannabisRadio.com is prohibited. seed to sale, clicks to conversions, and more. You're listening to the Cannabis Radio Network.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Police in the U.S. city of Colorado Springs say 3 people have been killed in a shooting at a family planning center. A gunman opened fire at the clinic, which is run by the Planned Parenthood organization. The shooting continued for several hours before the gunman surrendered to police. The city's mayor said those killed were 2 civilians and a police officer. Pope Francis will pay his respects to Ugandan Christians martyred for their faith in the 19th century on the latest stage of his trip to Africa. As many as 2 million people are expected to attend an open-air mass at Namugongo, where most of the 45 Anglican and Catholic martyrs were burned alive. The Brazilian government says it will sue a mining consortium, Samarco, for the damage caused after a wastewater dam at an iron ore mine collapsed, pouring millions of cubic meters of sludge into the Rio Doce, one of Brazil's most important rivers. The Environment Minister said the consortium would have to pay at least $5.2 billion. Prosecutors in Poland say they won't challenge a court ruling which rejected U.S. efforts to extradite the film director Roman Polanski to face sentencing for raping a teenage girl. The prosecutor's office said there was no basis for an appeal. Mr. Polanski fled America in 1978 before being sentenced in a rape case. Japan has decided to resume hunting whales in the Antarctic after a break of more than a year. The decision comes despite a ruling by the International Court of Justice that Japan should cease all whaling. The Japanese Fisheries Agency said it would go ahead with a revised plan by the end of March next year. Scientists in Europe have started the first official trials to determine whether feeding insects to pigs and chickens is safe. In an experiment, dried maggots or houseflies are ground up and mixed with grains before being given to the animals. BBC News.
Your connection to quality cannabis insurance services is spelled K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R. That's Karcher Insurance. We have worked with ventures like cannabis for over 60 years. We're proud to represent over 50 companies with tailor-made cannabis plans for owners just like you to insure your product, your plants, and your pursuits. K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R spells out their full-service insurance services ranging from commercial to bonds to personal, from life to health, and more. Contact the team at KarcherInsurance.com and let our experience work for you. That's K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R Insurance.com.
Contact Karen and the team at Karcher Insurance at 1-844-421-3560. That's 844-421-3560.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Rebecca Foster. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said Turkey crossed the line by shooting down a Russian jet earlier this week. His comments came as he welcomed his Syrian counterpart for a meeting in Moscow. FSN's Nick Harper reports from the Russian capital.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov expressed his displeasure at Turkey's actions, saying they had crossed a line of permissibility and were at risk of leading Turkey into the most severe situation. Lavrov said Turkey was hurting its long-term national interests and its position in the region. Meeting with Lavrov, Syria's Foreign Minister Walid Moallem said it was an unprecedented, provocative act of aggression by Turkey. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Erdogan has said that Russia should not play with fire. He's invited Russian President Vladimir Putin to meet him next week on the sidelines of the Paris Climate Change Summit, but says he's not yet received an answer.
France has held a memorial service for the 130 victims of the deadly Paris attacks that took place 2 weeks ago. Some 2,600 people attended the ceremony, where a minute silence was held and the names of those who died read out in remembrance. President François Hollande spoke, promising the country will do all it can to destroy those behind the attacks. This as a sixth person in Belgium has been arrested and charged in connection with the Paris attacks. Security in Brussels remains high, even though the terror alert level has been lowered. Kevin Ozebek has the latest from Brussels.
The Belgian prosecutor's office is not releasing the identity of the sixth person arrested with alleged links to the Paris terror attacks. Also, it's unknown right now what exactly the suspected link is between this person and the attacks. While the terror threat level in Brussels has been lowered from a level 4 to a level 3, military officers armed with assault rifles continue to heavily patrol the capital.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth II has opened a Commonwealth Leaders Summit in Malta, which is expected to focus on climate change and security issues. The 53 members of the Commonwealth are in attendance, with the Queen announcing the importance of the body in tackling global issues. Here's our UK correspondent, Natalie Powell.
The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting takes place every 2 years. High on the agenda this year will be the issues of climate change ahead of the Paris Climate Summit next week and security threats, including how best to deal with the threat of terrorism. UK Prime Minister David Cameron has stressed that the Commonwealth nations have a vital role to play in tackling terrorism and extremism, which comes after the Prime Minister made his case in Parliament for the UK to begin airstrikes over Syria. The Queen opened the meeting and was accompanied by her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, as well as Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN. The U.S. Air Force has launched a program to hire civilian contractors to fly Reaper drones. The military says these flights only gather intelligence, but the LA Times reports the program has been met with criticism that civilians are inching their way toward a combat role. Our U.S. correspondent Priscilla Huff has more.
For the first time, civilian contractors are taking the controls of Reaper drone aircraft patrols over the Middle East. The Los Angeles Times reports the U.S. Air Force insists the civilians are not allowed to pinpoint targets or fire missiles from the unmanned aerial vehicles. But legal experts, both inside and outside the Pentagon, are critical of the program, saying it puts civilians in the so-called kill chain, the process that starts with surveillance of a possible target and ends with the decision to fire a missile, essentially a combat role.
And controversial filmmaker Roman Polanski has won another victory in his battle against facing rape charges in the United States. Poland has decided not to extradite Mr. Polanski to California, and U.S. authorities are now running out of options. John Clark has this update.
Roman Polanski fled the US in 1977 after admitting having sex with a 13-year-old girl. American authorities have been fighting ever since to get him back. A Swiss court rejected an extradition attempt 5 years ago, and a Polish court earlier this year decided he wouldn't get a fair trial back in the US. Polish prosecutors have now decided not to appeal that decision, effectively ending the case. Polanski, famous for movies such as Rosemary's Baby and Chinatown, is a citizen of both Poland and France. His lawyers say he's relieved by the decision, and the 82-year-old director is preparing to make another movie in Poland.
For more of the day's top stories, you can follow us on Twitter @FeatureStory or check out our website at featurestorynews.com. And that's the latest from Feature Story News. Rebecca Foster reporting.
Earn your PhD in THC monetization with CannabisRadio.com. Don't be late.
From the Sky News Centre at 3, 2 civilians and a police officer have been killed in a shooting at a family planning clinic in the US. 9 people, including 5 officers, were also wounded in the attack in Colorado Springs, but are in a good condition in hospital. The suspected gunman is now in custody. Chief of Police Peter Carey has spoken to reporters.
I was able to spend a little bit of time at several of the hospitals with our injured officers as well as some victims of this thing. All I can say is my heart's broken. This is a really, really tough situation for a lot of people in our community and the community at large.
A man and woman have died after a fire at a terraced house on Merseyside last night. Police officers who were attending another incident on the street in Seacombe on the Wirral tried to save them, but couldn't because of the intense heat and smoke. The Labour leader has emailed party members for their views on airstrikes against Islamic State in Syria, as more than half of his front bench disagrees with him on the issue. Jeremy Corbyn's against David Cameron's plans to bomb IS targets there, causing a split in his own party. Thousands of protesters, meanwhile, who oppose the airstrikes are expected to take part in demonstrations across the country later. Lindsay German is from the Stop the War coalition.
There will be consequences of this war, and I fear that there will be consequences in terms of future terrorist attacks in this country, and the idea that these interventions make no difference to that is simply not true.
A number of towns have cancelled their Christmas light switch-on events this weekend after warnings of very strong winds. Bognor Regis, Portsmouth and parts of Ayrshire are among the areas that have suspended their festive plans. Amazon UK had its biggest sales day ever yesterday with more than 6 million items ordered. The online retailer says it beats the previous record of 5.5 million set on Black Friday last year. And in sport, it's 1-1 heading into day 2 of the Davis Cup tennis final between Great